Max's laughter died the second the door creaked open. Every head turned silence, thick as smoke as a shadow stepped into the Ember Lounge. The man every criminal in this city swore was a ghost was standing there, eyes locked on the thugs who'd just humiliated his daughter. No one breathed, because they all knew the legend wasn't dead. He was a father. If you're hooked in and want to enjoy this story, go ahead and subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see where everyone's watching. Plus, tomorrow I've got another incredible story lined up, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Alright, back to the story. You think you can just spill a drink on me and walk away? Max's words cut through the warm hum of the Ember Lounge like a blade through silk. His fingers wrapped around Lori's arm tight, possessive, cruel. Didn't they teach you? Around here, respect's earned, or taken. The tray clattered to the floor. Glass exploded. Whiskey spread in dark pools beneath the amber lights. Lori dropped to her knees, the impact jarring her bones, her breath catching as laughter erupted around her. Jimmy, bald, broad, grinning like a man who'd never faced consequences, stepped forward. His boot landed on the fallen tray with a sickening crack, grinding metal and glass into splinters. Clean faster, sweetheart. Unless you want me to teach you what happens to girls who don't listen. The music seemed to dim. Conversations died. A woman gasped somewhere in the back. A man halfway out of his seat froze when Max's head snapped toward him. Sit down, hero. The man sat. Lori's hands trembled as she reached for the shattered glass. Her uniform white blouse, black slacks, was already ruined. Whiskey soaked through the fabric, cold against her skin. Her cheeks burned with humiliation, but she kept her eyes down. She'd learned years ago that looking predators in the eye only made them hungrier. Max leaned closer, his breath reeking of bourbon and entitlement. You new girls always think you're special. Think you can just waltz in here and… Max, come on, man. She's just a waitress. The voice came from a booth near the back, irregular, older, uncomfortable. Max straightened, turning his glare toward the speaker. You got something to say? The man looked away. That's what I thought. Around them, the Ember Lounge pulsed with tension. It was a beautiful place, exposed brick walls, Edison bulbs casting warm light, leather booths worn soft with age. The kind of bar that looked upscale but felt dangerous, where business deals happened in whispers and loyalty was currency. Lori had only been working here 3 days, long enough to learn the regulars' names, long enough to sense the unspoken rules, long enough to realize she'd made a terrible mistake taking this job, but not long enough to understand why. Jimmy crouched beside her, his grin widening. You know what this place is, sweetheart? This is where people like you learn their place. You think you're gonna serve drinks, collect tips, go home safe? He laughed sharp, ugly. This ain't that kind of bar. Lori's fingers closed around a shard of glass. Pain flared in her palm. Blood welled, warm and bright. She didn't make a sound. Look at that, Max said, nudging Jimmy. She's tougher than she looks. Maybe we should. The door swung open. The laughter didn't fade, it stopped. All at once, like air sucked from the room. Footsteps echoed slow, deliberate, heavy boots on polished hardwood. Lori looked up, and her world fractured. Matthew Smith stepped into the light. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black jeans, boots, a simple t-shirt that did nothing to hide the muscle beneath. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing tattoos that crawled up forearms like living warnings. A serpent coiled around his right arm. A crown of thorns circled his left wrist. Latin phrases she couldn't read from this distance. His face. She'd almost forgotten what he looked like in person. 3 years was a long time, but seeing him now, jaw carved from stone, dark eyes sweeping the room with cold precision, she remembered everything. The way he used to read her bedtime stories with voices that made her laugh. The way he'd taught her to tie her shoes, patient and gentle. The way he'd looked at her the last time they spoke, eyes heavy with regret, and said, "You deserve a life I can't give you." Dad. The word caught in her throat, unspoken. Matthew didn't run, didn't shout. He just walked each step, measured, purposeful, eyes locked on the scene ahead. The room seemed to shrink around him. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the bartender froze, rag in hand, staring. Rick, the bar manager, stood behind the counter. His face had gone pale. Without a word, he moved to the entrance and locked the door. The music cut. The ambient noise, laughter, clinking glasses, murmured conversations evaporated. Max and Jimmy still hadn't noticed. They were too busy feeding on their audience's fear. Jimmy grabbed Lori's wrist, pulling her hand toward him. "Let me see that cut, sweetheart. Wouldn't want you bleeding all over. You've got 5 seconds to move your hand." The voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of mountains. Jimmy's grin faltered. He looked up, his face went slack. Max turned, frowning. "Hey, old man, this ain't your—" The words died when he saw Matthew's eyes. Lori had seen that look before. Once. When she was 14 and a man had tried to grab her outside a convenience store. Her father had appeared from nowhere, silent, sudden, and the man had run before Matthew even touched him. This was worse. This was the look of a man who'd already decided how this ended, who'd measured every variable, who knew exactly how much pain he could inflict before bones broke and lungs stopped. Matthew stopped 3 feet away. His gaze dropped to Lori, kneeling, bleeding, humiliated, and something flickered across his face. Not anger, worse, grief. Then it was gone, replaced by ice. He looked at Jimmy, at Max, at the room. 5 seconds, he repeated. Jimmy's hand opened. Lori's wrist fell free. The silence pressed down like a living thing, and in that moment, every person in the Ember Lounge understood. The legend they'd whispered about the ghost who'd ruled this city's underworld years ago was standing in the room. And the girl they'd just humiliated? She was his daughter. Before Lori even knew the danger she walked into, lives were already about to change forever. Don't let yourself miss the moment that will haunt you. Subscribe now, because once this night unfolds, you'll wish you were there from the start. 3 days earlier, the bus station smelled like diesel and stale coffee. Lori Smith stood on the curb, suitcase at her feet, staring at the city skyline ahead. Glass towers caught the afternoon sun, glittering like promises she didn't trust anymore. She'd left everything behind, again. Her apartment in Denver, the waitressing job at a diner where nobody asked questions, the carefully constructed life she'd built on the foundation of a lie that she was nobody's daughter, that her last name meant nothing, that she could be ordinary. But ordinary was a luxury people like Lori Smith couldn't afford. Her phone buzzed. A text from an old friend. "You sure about this?" Lori didn't reply. She powered off the phone, dropped it in her bag, and walked. The city swallowed her whole. The Ember Lounge sat on a corner in the Arts District, exposed brick, tall windows, a sign that glowed amber even in daylight. Upscale but not pretentious. The kind of place where businessmen met after work and couples shared wine before theater. Lori had found it on a job board. Waitress needed. Immediate start. Cash tips. She needed immediate. She needed cash. She needed to disappear. The interview lasted 10 minutes. Rick stood behind the bar, mid-50s, gray at the temples, scarred knuckles wrapped around a coffee mug. Former boxer, she guessed. The kind of man who'd seen violence up close and learned to read people by their flinches. "Can you work nights?" he asked. "Yes." "Can you handle difficult customers?" "I've worked bars before." Rick studied her. His eyes lingered on her hands, no rings, no nail polish, calluses on her palms from years of carrying trays. Then her face exhausted, guarded, too careful for someone her age. "You running from something?" Lori met his gaze. "Aren't we all?" Rick smiled, sad, knowing. "You start Friday. Wear black and white. Don't be late." She wasn't. Friday night, the Ember Lounge transformed. The afternoon crowd, professionals, quiet couples, gave way to something darker. Men in expensive suits with cold eyes. Women in designer dresses who laughed too loud. Conversations dropped to whispers when certain people walked by. Lori noticed. She'd spent her whole life noticing. The way the bartender, Carlos, young, nervous, poured drinks faster when specific customers arrived. The way Rick watched the door like a soldier on patrol. The way certain booths in the back never appeared on the reservation list but were always occupied. She kept her head down, smiled politely, remembered orders, moved through the crowd like water present but unnoticed. At the end of her shift, Rick handed her an envelope. Cash, more than she expected. "You're good at this," he said. "Natural." "Thank you." "One thing, though." Rick's expression darkened. "You see anything that makes you uncomfortable, anything, you come to me first. Don't try to handle it yourself. Understood?" Lori nodded, though unease prickled her spine. "Good." Rick paused, studying her again. "You really don't know where you are, do you? It's a bar. It's more than that. But maybe it's better you don't know." Lori left before he could explain. That night, alone in her tiny studio apartment, she stood at the window staring at the city lights. Her reflection stared back, dark hair pulled into a bun, tired eyes, the silver bracelet on her wrist catching lamplight. The bracelet. She should have thrown it away years ago. Should have left it in the box with the other relics of her childhood photos she couldn't bear to look at. Birthday cards signed in her father's careful handwriting, the stuffed bear he'd won for her at a carnival when she was 7. But she couldn't. It was the last thing he'd given her before she left. The night they'd fought, voices raised, tears shed, words spoken that couldn't be taken back. "You think you can protect me forever?" she'd screamed. "I'm not a child anymore. I know." His voice had been quiet, broken. "That's what terrifies me." He'd pressed the bracelet into her palm. Silver, delicate, engraved with the Smith family crest, a serpent coiled around a crown. "So you never forget who you are," he'd said. "Even when you're trying to." She'd left the next morning without saying goodbye. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of silence. 3 years of building a life without him. 3 years of pretending the name Smith meant nothing. And now, she was in his city, working in a bar that felt like his shadow. Coincidence? Laurie didn't believe in coincidence. Meanwhile, across the city, in a high-rise apartment overlooking the river, Matthew Smith stood at the window with a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. The voicemail played again. 3rd time tonight. "Boss, you might want to check the Ember. Some idiots are stirring things there. Callisto Crew's been sniffing around. Thought you'd want to know that's still your ground." Matthew's jaw tightened. The Ember Lounge. He hadn't stepped foot in that place in 3 years. Not since the night he'd decided to walk away from the Empire, from the violence, from the life that had consumed him since he was 16. He'd done it for her. For Laurie. "You deserve a life I can't give you," he'd told her. "A life without this world." She'd left anyway, cut him out completely, changed her number, disappeared. He'd respected it, kept his distance, monitored her from afar through contacts he trusted, making sure she stayed safe, stayed hidden, stayed far from the shadows that followed his name. But now, his phone buzzed. A text from Rick. "We might have a problem." Matthew's hand tightened around the glass. Then another message. A photo. A young woman in a white blouse and black slacks, carrying a tray through the Ember Lounge's crowded floor, dark hair, familiar eyes, and on her wrist, barely visible but unmistakable, a silver bracelet engraved with a serpent and crown. Matthew's breath caught. Laurie. The glass slipped from his hand, shattering on hardwood. His daughter, his careful, brilliant, stubborn daughter, had walked straight into the one place in the city where his past still lived and breathed, and she had no idea the danger she'd just invited into her life. Matthew grabbed his jacket, keys already in hand. The ghost of the city was about to return, and God help anyone who got in his way. The Ember Lounge hummed with Saturday night energy. Laurie moved between tables, balancing trays with practiced ease, her smile polite but distant. 2 days into the job, and she'd already learned the rhythm: who tipped well, who lingered too long, who wanted conversation and who wanted silence. At the bar, 2 men argued over whiskey. "I'm telling you, he's dead," the younger one insisted, voice slurred. "Matthew Smith. Been gone 3 years. You don't just walk away from that life and live." "Nah." The older man shook his head. "Guy like that doesn't die easy. He's out there somewhere, probably sipping Mai Tais on a beach in Costa Rica. With whose money? Feds seized everything. You think a man like Matthew Smith kept his money where the feds could find it?" Laurie's hand trembled. The glasses on her tray rattled. She steadied herself, breathing slow, and kept walking. But her heart hammered against her ribs. 3 years. 3 years of distance and silence. And still his name followed her like a ghost she couldn't outrun. At table 7, a woman in pearls waved her over. "Another Cosmo, sweetheart. And tell Carlos to actually put vodka in it this time." "Of course." Laurie delivered the order, collected empty glasses, smiled through the casual dismissal in the woman's tone. Normal. She just had to stay normal. But nothing about this place felt normal. The way certain customers commanded the room without raising their voices. The way Rick's eyes never stopped scanning. The way conversations dropped to whispers when specific names were mentioned. Names like Matthew Smith. Across town, in a warehouse that smelled of oil and concrete, the Callisto crew gathered. Max leaned against a rusted car, checking his phone. Jimmy paced, agitated, hands shoved in his pockets. Around them, a dozen men waited, young, hungry, eager to prove themselves. Callisto himself sat in the back office. 32, sharp-featured, expensive suit that didn't quite hide the street in his posture. He'd risen fast in the 3 years since Matthew Smith vanished, filled the vacuum, claimed territory, built loyalty through fear and cash. But there were places in the city that still whispered the old name. Places where Callisto's authority meant nothing. The Ember Lounge was one of them. "You sure about this?" Max asked, entering the office. Callisto didn't look up from his laptop. "About what?" "Making noise at the Ember. That place. It's got history." "History's just a story dead men tell." Callisto closed the laptop, finally meeting Max's eyes. "Matthew Smith is gone. His network scattered. His protection's a memory. That bar? It's prime real estate in my territory. Rick won't roll over easy. Rick's an old man playing pretend. And if he won't cooperate..." Callisto smiled cold, calculated. "Then we make an example. Show the city that the old guard's finished, that this is my town now." Max nodded slowly. "What do you want us to do?" "Test the waters. Go in loud. Make them uncomfortable. Let's see if anyone still has the spine to push back." Jimmy appeared in the doorway, grinning. "When do we start?" "Tonight." Back at the Ember Lounge, Lori wiped down table 12, her mind elsewhere. The conversation at the bar had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Hearing her father's name spoken like folklore, legend, and rumor, fear and respect tangled together reminded her of why she'd left. She'd spent her childhood in the shadow of that name. Watched her father disappear for days, return exhausted, haunted. Seen men bow their heads when he entered rooms. Heard whispers at school, "That's Matthew Smith's daughter. Don't mess with her." She'd hated it. The weight. The expectation. The way violence lurked beneath every surface, waiting to break through. When she turned 18, she'd made him promise. "Let me go. Let me be normal." He'd agreed. Eventually. After months of arguments, tears, sleepless nights. "You deserve better than this," he'd said. "Better than me." She'd believed him. Believed she could build a life free from his shadow. But here she was. In his city. In his bar. And his name still echoed through conversations like a prayer or a curse. "Lori." She turned. Rick stood behind the bar, expression unreadable. "Yeah? You okay? You look pale." "I'm fine. Just tired." Rick studied her that same careful assessment from the interview. "You hear those guys talking earlier? About Matthew Smith?" Lori's stomach dropped. Yeah. Hard not to. Don't pay it any mind. Just drunk talk. Old stories." "Was he real? Matthew Smith?" Rick's expression darkened. He poured 2 fingers of whiskey, slid 1 glass toward her despite the fact she was working. "He was real. Still is, far as I know." "You knew him?" "Worked for him, long time ago." Rick took a slow sip. "Best man I ever met. And the most dangerous." "What happened to him?" "He walked away. Some say he got soft. Others say he got smart." Rick's eyes held hers. "Why the questions?" Lori looked away. "Just curious. People talk about him like he's a myth." "Myths don't leave scars." Before Lori could respond, the door swung open. Max walked in, first leather jacket, cocky stride, scanning the room like he owned it. Jimmy followed, broader, meaner, grinning at nothing. Behind them, 3 more men, all wearing the same hungry expression. The ambient noise dropped. Conversations faltered. Rick's jaw tightened. "Get in the back, Lori." "What? Why?" "Now." But it was too late. Max's eyes locked on her. Recognition flickered, not of who she was, but of what she represented. New, vulnerable, an easy target. He smiled. And Lori realized with cold certainty that whatever was about to happen, she'd walked straight into the middle of it. Rick reached beneath the bar. His hand hovered near something she couldn't see. Across the room, a man in the corner booth, older, scarred, watching everything, pulled out his phone and typed a single message. The message that would change everything. The message that would bring Matthew Smith home. The Ember Lounge filled like a tide, coming in steady, inevitable, drowning the space in noise and bodies, and the sharp electric tension that came with Friday nights. Lori moved through the crowd, tray balanced on one hand, weaving between tables where conversations happened in code. She'd learned to read the room now. 4 days in, and she understood the language, the way certain men commanded silence with a gesture, the way money exchanged hands beneath tables, the way Rick's eyes never stopped calculating. At the bar, Carlos poured drinks faster than usual. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "You good?" Lori asked, dropping off empties. "Yeah, just busy night." but his eyes darted toward the VIP section in the back, a booth behind frosted glass where shadows moved but faces stayed hidden. "Who's back there?" Carlos didn't answer, just poured 3 fingers of top-shelf bourbon and loaded it onto a tray with shaking hands. Lori didn't ask again. Max arrived at 9:30, Jimmy at his side, 3 others trailing behind. They moved through the bar like wolves, testing territory, loud, aggressive, claiming space that wasn't theirs. "Yo, Rick," Max called out, draping himself over a bar stool. "Heard this place serves the best whiskey in the city. That true, or just reputation?" Rick's expression stayed neutral. "We serve good whiskey. You'll have to decide if it's the best." "I like that. Humble." Max grinned, but there was nothing friendly in it. "Pour me your top shelf, and don't water it down like you probably do for tourists." Rick poured without comment, sliding the glass across polished wood. Max took a sip, made a show of considering. "Not bad. Not great, but not bad." Jimmy laughed too loud, performative. A few patrons glanced over, then quickly away. Lori felt the shift in atmosphere. The way conversations grew quieter, the way Rick's shoulders tensed, the way the man in the corner booth, the one who'd been watching all week, set down his drink and leaned forward. "Table 9 needs refills," Rick said quietly to Lori. "Stay on that side of the room." "Rick, do it." She did. But her eyes kept drifting back to the bar where Max held court, voice growing louder with each drink. 10 o'clock. The VIP booth's door opened. A man emerged, 30s, sharp suit, cold eyes. Callisto. Lori didn't know his name yet, but she recognized power when she saw it. The way he moved through the room like he owned it. The way men straightened when he passed. The way Rick's face went carefully blank. Callisto approached the bar, ignoring Max and Jimmy entirely. "Rick, we need to talk." "About?" "Business. The kind that's better discussed in private." "I'm working." "So am I." Callisto smiled razor thin. "New management's taking over this district. Thought you'd want to know before things get uncomfortable." Rick's knuckles went white around the glass he was drying. "This bar's independent. Always has been. Was. Past tense." Callisto leaned closer. "Your protection's gone, old man. Matthew Smith's a ghost story. Time to accept reality." The name hung in the air like smoke. Lori's tray trembled. A glass slipped, shattering on the floor. Every eye turned toward her. "Shit," she whispered, dropping to her knees, hands scrambling for the broken pieces. Max's laugh cut through the silence. "Looks like the new girl's nervous. That's adorable." Jimmy pushed off his stool, swaggering toward her. "Need help, sweetheart? You look like you're struggling." "I'm fine." "Doesn't look fine." He crouched beside her, grinning. "You know what this place is? Really?" Lori kept her eyes down, gathering glass. Her hands shook. "It's where people learn their place." Jimmy continued. "Where the strong eat and the weak. Well." He picked up a shard, held it to the light. "They clean up messes." "They clean up messes." "Jimmy." Callisto's voice quiet but absolute. "Leave her." Jimmy hesitated, then stood, dropping the glass. It shattered again near Lori's hand. Max approached, drink in hand. He looked down at Lori, still kneeling, still gathering pieces, and something dark flickered across his face. Not attraction, not even cruelty. Opportunity. "You know what?" Max's voice carried across the bar. "I'm tired of waiting for my food. Where's my order?" I don't think you ordered food," Lori said quietly. "What did you say?" She looked up, meeting his eyes, and immediately regretted it. "I said." Max's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. "I ordered food 30 minutes ago. You telling me I'm wrong?" "Let her go." Rick's voice, sharp as glass. "Or what, old man? You gonna make me?" The room held its breath, then chaos. Max pulled Lori to her feet. She stumbled, knocked into him, her tray still in her other hand tilted. Whiskey splashed across his leather jacket. The liquid spread dark across expensive material. Max's face went red. "You stupid." "It was an accident," Lori gasped. "I'm sorry, Sorry?" Max's grip tightened, bruising. "You think sorry fixes this?" Jimmy moved closer, circling. Other patrons stood, but no one intervened. Callisto watched from the bar, expression unreadable, and in the corner booth, the scarred man's phone screen glowed. A message sent. Across the city, in a high-rise apartment, Matthew Smith's phone buzzed. He'd been staring at Lori's photo for the last hour, the one Rick had sent. His daughter, in the Ember Lounge, in his world, in danger she didn't understand. The new message was simple. They're making their move. She's the target. Matthew's vision tunneled. He grabbed his jacket, black leather, worn soft from years of wear, his keys, his wallet, and from the locked drawer in his desk, something else. The ring he used to wear, heavy silver, engraved with the same crest as Lori's bracelet, the symbol every criminal in this city used to fear. Matthew Smith slipped it on his finger, and the ghost became flesh again. Back at the Ember Lounge, Max shoved Lori backward. She crashed to her knees, glass and whiskey spreading around her like accusation. "You think you can just spill a drink on me and walk away?" Max sneered. "Didn't they teach you? Around here, respect's earned, or taken." Jimmy's boot hovered over her fallen tray. The room watched, and outside, headlights cut through the darkness as a black car pulled to the curb. The door opened. Matthew Smith stepped out into the night, and everything was about to change. The glass shattered beneath Jimmy's boot like bones breaking. Lori flinched, her hands scrambling across the wet floor, whiskey soaking through her uniform, cold and humiliating. Shards cut into her palms, small stings that barely registered against the larger pain blooming in her chest. "Breathe. Just breathe. Get through this." But Max wasn't done. He crouched beside her, his breath hot against her ear, voice low enough that only she could hear. "You know what happens to girls who don't show respect? Who think they're too good for this place?" Lori's throat closed. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. "They learn." Max's hand clamped on her shoulder, forcing her lower. "The hard way." Laughter rippled through the bar, ugly, eager, the kind that fed on fear. Some patrons looked away. Others watched with the detached curiosity of people who'd seen this before. Who knew how it ended? A woman near the back, middle-aged, expensive jewelry, stood halfway, hand covering her mouth. Her companion pulled her back down. "Don't," he whispered. "Just don't." Jimmy circled, grinning like a predator playing with wounded prey. He picked up another shard of glass, turning it in the light. "Respect, sweetheart. It's the only currency that matters here. And you?" He dropped the shard near her knee. "You're bankrupt." Lori's vision blurred. Not from tears she refused to cry, but from the pressure building behind her eyes, the rage and humiliation and bone-deep exhaustion of running for 3 years, only to end up here, on her knees, in her father's world, proving he'd been right all along. You can't outrun blood. At the bar, Rick's hand moved beneath the counter. His fingers brushed cold steel, the revolver he'd kept there for 15 years, the one he'd sworn he'd never use again. But watching Lori on the floor, watching Max and Jimmy circle her like wolves, something ancient stirred in Rick's chest. Loyalty. The kind that didn't die just because a man walked away. Carlos caught his eye, shook his head slightly. Too many witnesses, too many cameras, too much heat. Rick's jaw clenched. He knew Carlos was right, but knowing didn't make it easier. In the VIP booth, Callisto watched through the frosted glass, expression unreadable. His lieutenant, a thin man named Vincent, leaned close. "Should we stop them? This is getting messy." "Let it play out," Callisto murmured. "Max needs to prove himself, and this place needs to understand the old rules don't apply anymore. What if someone calls the cops? Then we handle it, like we always do." Callisto took a slow sip of bourbon. "Besides, who's gonna call? Half these people know better. The other half are too scared." Vincent nodded, but unease flickered across his face. "What about Rick? Rick's a relic. He'll fall in line or he'll disappear." But even as Callisto spoke, something nagged at him. The way Rick hadn't backed down completely. The way the old man's eyes kept darting to the door. The way this whole thing felt, staged, like someone was waiting for exactly this moment. On the floor, Lori's hands closed around a larger piece of glass. Blood welled from a fresh cut, warm and bright. She didn't feel it. All she felt was the weight, the unbearable weight of being small, being prey, being the girl who'd spent 3 years trying to escape violence, only to have it find her anyway. "Look at me," Max commanded, gripping her chin, forcing her face up. She met his eyes, and for the first time since this started, she didn't look away. "There it is," Max said, grinning. "Some fire after all. But fire gets put out, sweetheart. Always does." Jimmy laughed, stepping closer. His boot pressed down on Lori's dropped tray, metal groaning under his weight. "You want to know the secret to surviving a place like this?" Lori said nothing. "You bow." You smile. You do what you're told. Jimmy leaned down, his face inches from hers. And you never, ever forget your place. The pressure on the tray increased, metal shrieked, and then silence. Not gradual, not fading, but instant, absolute, the kind of silence that comes when every survival instinct in a room screams danger. The laughter stopped mid-breath. Conversations died mid-word. Even the music seemed to dim, though Carlos hadn't touched the controls. Max's grin faltered. Jimmy straightened, frowning. Lori felt it before she heard it, the shift in air pressure, the electric charge that precedes lightning. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, each one landing with the weight of inevitability. The front door swung open. Cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and asphalt. The ambient light from the street cast a long shadow across the polished floor, a shadow that stretched and grew until it swallowed everything. And Matthew Smith stepped into the Ember Lounge. He didn't rush, didn't shout, didn't draw a weapon. He just walked. Black jeans, black boots, black leather jacket worn soft from years of wear, sleeves pushed up to reveal forearms covered in ink, a serpent coiling up his right arm, its fangs bared, a crown of thorns circling his left wrist. Latin phrases in script so precise they looked carved rather than tattooed. His face was weathered lines around his eyes, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, jaw dark with stubble. But his eyes were ice, cold, empty, the kind of emptiness that comes from seeing too much death to be impressed by cruelty. He walked past the bar without glancing at Rick, past the tables where patrons froze, drinks halfway to lips, past the booth where Callisto sat forward, face going pale. His eyes never left the scene ahead, his daughter on the floor, two men standing over her, blood on her hands, fear in her eyes. Rick moved without thinking. The door locked, the music cut, the light slightly dimmed. Every employee in the Ember Lounge shifted into position, subtle, practiced, the choreography of soldiers who'd never really retired. Max finally noticed. He turned, frowning at the man approaching. "Hey, old man, I don't know who you think." The words died, because Matthew's eyes, those cold, ancient, merciless eyes, locked on him. And Max understood, suddenly and completely, that he'd just made a mistake he wouldn't survive. Jimmy opened his mouth to speak. Matthew's voice cut through the silence, quiet, controlled, final. "You've got 5 seconds to move your foot." The room held its breath. And Lori, still kneeling in broken glass and spilled whiskey, looked up at the man who'd haunted her dreams for 3 years. "Dad?" she whispered. The word barely escaped her lips. But in that moment, every person in the Ember Lounge understood. The legend had returned, and hell was about to break loose. Before the silence breaks and the storm unleashes, you need to know what happens when a father's love becomes the most dangerous weapon in the room. Hit subscribe, you won't want to miss a single second of what comes next. The silence was suffocating. Matthew's eyes moved slowly, deliberately taking in every detail. His daughter on the floor, blood on her palms, whiskey soaking through her white blouse. The glass scattered around her like fallen stars. The bruises already forming on her wrist, where Max's fingers had dug in. And the bracelet. Silver, delicate, engraved with the serpent and crown, the one he'd given her the night she left. Recognition slammed into him like a freight train. Not surprised Rick's message had prepared him, but seeing her, kneeling in the ruins of her dignity, ignited something in his chest that had been dormant for 3 years. Not rage. Worse. Purpose. "Lori," he said quietly, her name on his lips after 3 years of silence, 3 years of distance, 3 years of pretending he could protect her by staying away, felt like prayer and confession rolled into one. She looked up, eyes wide, disbelieving. "Dad?" The room gasped. The legend that had been whispered about for 3 years, the ghost story, the myth, the man who'd walked away from an empire, had a daughter, and she was here, in this bar, in this moment. Max's face went slack. His hand still gripping Lori's shoulder trembled. Jimmy took a step back, his earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. Matthew's gaze shifted to them. He didn't blink, didn't speak, just looked, and that look contained multitudes. Every broken bone he'd ever delivered, every debt he'd ever collected, every warning he'd ever given that went unheeded. 5 seconds, he repeated, voice barely above a whisper. Jimmy's boot lifted off the tray. He stumbled backward, hands raised. We didn't know. 4. Max released Lori's shoulder like she'd burned him. "Mr. Smith, listen. This was just 3. A misunderstanding. We were just messing around. We didn't mean. 2. Callisto emerged from the VIP booth, face pale but composed. Matthew, it's been a long time. Matthew didn't turn, didn't acknowledge him. His eyes stayed locked on Max and Jimmy, two men who'd made the fatal mistake of touching something that belonged to him. 1. Max broke first. He lunged sideways, trying to put distance between himself and Matthew. But he'd barely taken 2 steps before Matthew moved. Fast. Too fast for a man his size. Too fast for someone who'd supposedly been retired. His hand shot out, catching Max by the collar. The momentum from Max's attempted escape worked against him. Matthew used it, redirecting the energy, slamming Max face first into the nearest table. The impact was brutal. Wood cracked, glasses shattered. Max's nose exploded in a spray of red. The entire bar flinched. Matthew didn't. He held Max down with one hand, applying just enough pressure to make breathing difficult but not impossible. His voice when he spoke was conversational, almost gentle. "You put your hands on my daughter." Max tried to speak. Blood bubbled from his lips. I didn't know." "You didn't ask." Matthew leaned closer. "That's your problem. You see someone vulnerable and you take. You don't think. You don't consider. You just take. I'm sorry." "No, you're scared. There's a difference." Matthew released him. Max collapsed to the floor, gasping, blood pooling beneath his face. Jimmy hadn't moved. He stood frozen, one boot still inches from Laurie's ruined tray, face white as chalk. Matthew turned to him. "Run," Matthew said quietly. Jimmy didn't need to be told twice. He bolted for the door, but Rick was already there, arms crossed, blocking the exit. "Where you going, kid?" Rick's voice was almost sympathetic. "Party just started." Jimmy spun, wild-eyed, looking for another exit. But every door, every window, was now occupied. The regulars, the quiet men who'd watched from corners all week, had moved into position. No weapons visible, no threats spoken, just presence, bodies blocking escape routes. The Ember Lounge had become a trap, and Jimmy was the rat. In the VIP booth, Vincent grabbed Callisto's arm. "We need to leave, now." Callisto shook him off, but his hand trembled as he reached for his phone. "He's one man. He's Matthew Smith. He's retired. Does he look retired to you?" Callisto looked at the man standing in the center of his bar. At the casual way Matthew commanded the room, at the loyalty in Rick's eyes, at the way every dangerous person in the Ember Lounge had suddenly remembered who they really answered to. And Callisto understood. He'd been operating in a dead man's shadow. But the dead man wasn't dead. He'd just been sleeping, and now he was awake. "Back exit," Callisto whispered, quietly. They slipped toward the kitchen, trying to blend into the chaos, trying to escape, but Matthew saw. He always saw. His eyes tracked Callisto's movement, noted it, filed it, but didn't pursue. Not yet. First, he had to deal with the immediate threat. He turned back to Jimmy, who'd given up trying to escape and was now pressed against the bar, shaking. "Please," Jimmy whispered. "Please, I have a kid." "So do I." Matthew's voice was flat. "And you hurt her. It was Max's idea. I just followed. You had a choice." Matthew stepped closer. "You could have walked away, could have said no, could have been a decent human being." Jimmy's legs gave out. He slid down the bar, landing hard on the floor. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry." Matthew crouched, bringing himself to eye level. For a moment they just looked at each other, predator and prey, judge and condemned. Then Matthew spoke, and his words were colder than any violence. "You're going to tell Callisto when he grows the spine to come back that this bar is off limits. This territory is off limits. This city." Matthew paused, letting the weight settle. "Is off limits." "Yes. Yes, sir. And if I ever see you again, if I hear you so much as looked at someone wrong, I won't be this kind. Understood?" Jimmy nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. Matthew stood, dismissing him with a glance. Then finally he turned to Laurie. She was still on the floor, surrounded by glass and whiskey, staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. Fear? Relief? Anger? All of it. None of it. Matthew extended his hand. "Get up, baby girl," he said softly. "Let's go home." Laurie looked at his hand-scarred knuckles, the silver ring glinting, and for 3 heartbeats, she didn't move. Then she reached up and took it. Matthew's hand closed around Laurie's warm, solid, familiar in a way that made her chest ache. He pulled her up gently, steadying her when she swayed, his other hand hovering near her elbow. "You hurt?" His voice was low, meant only for her. "I'm fine." "Lori." She met his eyes, those cold, merciless eyes that had terrified two grown men, and saw something different looking back at her. Concern, grief, the weight of 3 years compressed into a single moment. "My hands," she admitted quietly. "Cut. Nothing serious." Matthew's jaw tightened. He looked down at her palms, blood welling from small lacerations, glass embedded in her skin, and something flickered across his face that scared her more than his earlier violence. Tenderness. "Rick," Matthew called without looking away from Lori. "First aid kit. Already on it, boss." The word boss hung in the air. Confirmation of what Lori had suspected, what she'd tried to deny. This place wasn't random. Her presence here wasn't coincidence. This was his world, and she'd walked straight into the center of it. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew I was here." "Not at first." Matthew guided her toward the bar, his hand on her back. "Rick sent me a photo 2 days ago. I was coming anyway. This." His eyes swept the room, Max bleeding on the floor, Jimmy cowering, the silent witnesses. "This just accelerated the timeline. You were watching me. I was protecting you." "Same thing." "No, Lori, it's not." Before she could respond, Rick appeared with the first aid kit. Matthew took it, gestured to a bar stool. "Sit. I can do it myself." "I know. Sit anyway." Something in his tone, not commanding but pleading, made her comply. She sat, holding her hands out while he opened the kit with practiced efficiency. The bar watched in silence. This man, this legend who'd just demonstrated brutal violence, now handled his daughter's wounds with surgeon's precision. Tweezers removing glass, antiseptic applied gently, gauze wrapped carefully. "You shouldn't have come back," Lori said quietly. "You shouldn't have come here. I didn't know it was yours." "It's not. Not anymore." Matthew finished wrapping her left hand, moved to her right. "I gave this place to Rick 3 years ago. Told him to run it clean, keep it independent." "Then why?" "Because half this city still remembers my name, and parasites like Callisto thought my absence meant weakness." He secured the gauze, his hands lingering on hers for just a moment. "They were wrong." Behind them, Max groaned, trying to push himself up. Matthew didn't turn, but his voice carried. "Stay down. Ambulance is on the way." You broke my nose. Be grateful that's all I broke." Lori studied her father's face, the lines deeper than she remembered, the scar above his eyebrow new, the gray threading through his dark hair. 3 years had aged him. Or maybe he'd always looked this tired and she'd been too young to notice. "I left so you wouldn't have to do this anymore," she said. Matthew's hands stilled. "I know. I left so you could have peace." "I know. Then why are you here?" He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Because peace without you wasn't peace. It was just waiting." The words hit her like a physical blow. 3 years of silence. 3 years of convinced herself he was better off without her. 3 years of carrying guilt like stones in her pockets. And he'd been waiting. "Dad." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Rick appeared at Matthew's shoulder. "Cops are 2 minutes out. We need to move." Matthew nodded, standing. He turned to face the room, every eye on him, every breath held. "Max, Jimmy." His voice carried authority that made the air thick. "When the police ask what happened, you tell them it was a bar fight. 2 drunk idiots who got rowdy. Nothing more. And if we don't?" Jimmy's voice cracked. Matthew smiled cold, promising. "Then next time, I won't stop at broken bones." He turned to the wider room. "Everyone else, you saw nothing." A scuffle, quickly resolved. The owner handled it. No weapons. No excessive force. Just a Friday night that got a little heated. Heads nodded. Murmured agreements. This was his power. Not the violence, though, that helped. But the loyalty. The way people bent to his will, not from fear alone, but from respect earned over years of proving he protected his own. The sirens grew louder. "Rick, get Lori out the back. Take her to the safe house on 5th. What about you?" "I'll handle the police. Make sure they don't dig too deep." Matthew squeezed Lori's shoulder. "Go with Rick. We'll talk after." "No." Lori stood, pulling away. "I'm not running anymore." "Lori, you came back for me. Fine. But I'm not a child you can send away when things get dangerous." Her voice shook, but she held her ground. "I stay. We face this together. Or I walk out that door and you never see me again." Matthew stared at her, his brilliant, stubborn, fierce daughter, and saw himself reflected back. The same defiance, the same refusal to bend, the same loyalty that ran deeper than blood. "Together," he finally said. "But you follow my lead. Always do." Laurie lied. The corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile. The sirens stopped outside. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Rick unlocked the door. 2 officers entered, young, cautious, hands near their belts. Matthew stepped forward, hands visible, expression neutral. "Officers, thank you for coming. We had a minor altercation. 2 patrons got drunk, started pushing each other. We separated them, but one fell and hit his face on a table." The first officer, mid-20s, eager, looked past Matthew at the scene. Max on the floor, blood everywhere. Jimmy pale and shaking. The shattered glass, the terrified witnesses. That's one hell of a fall. Alcohol makes people clumsy. The second officer, older, weathered, studied Matthew. Recognition flickered. "Matthew Smith. Officer. Heard you left town. I came back." The older officer's eyes swept the room, taking in the silent loyalty, the careful positioning of witnesses, the story everyone would tell identically. "I see that." A moment passed. Then another. The older officer sighed. "Get statements from everyone, but I'm guessing they'll all match." "I'm guessing they will," Matthew agreed. As the officers moved through the room, Matthew returned to Laurie's side. "That was too easy," she whispered. "That officer? His daughter was kidnapped 5 years ago. I'm the one who found her." "You collected the debt." "I collected the debt." Laurie looked at her father, this man who'd built an empire on violence and loyalty, who'd walked away for her sake, who'd returned the moment she needed him, and understood something fundamental. She could run, she could hide, she could build 1,000 lives in 1,000 cities, but she'd always be Matthew Smith's daughter. And maybe that wasn't a curse. Maybe it was armor. The police left 30 minutes later with statements that matched perfectly, a plausible story, and the quiet understanding that some things in this city were better left unexplored. Max and Jimmy were loaded into an ambulance, Max with a broken nose and concussion, Jimmy with nothing but terror carved into his bones. They'd tell the story Matthew dictated. They had no choice. The Ember Lounge emptied slowly. Patrons filtered out in small groups, speaking in hushed tones, glancing back at the man who stood by the bar like he'd never left. Like the 3 years had been a blink, a pause between breaths. Laurie sat on the bar stool, hands wrapped in gauze, watching her father move through the space with quiet authority. A word here, a nod there, reassurance that everything was handled, controlled, safe. Rick approached, 2 glasses of water in hand. He set one in front of Laurie. The other he drank himself. "You okay, kid?" "Everyone keeps asking me that." "Because it's a legitimate question." Rick's voice softened. "That was intense. That was my childhood." Laurie took a sip, her hands still trembling slightly. "Every time something went wrong, he'd show up. Fix it. Make it disappear. He loves you." "I know, that's the problem." She looked at Rick, this man who'd hired her without questions, who'd protected her tonight, who was clearly more than just a bar manager. "You've been watching me, since I started." Rick didn't deny it. "Matthew asked me to. 3 years ago, when he handed over the bar. If my daughter ever shows up," he said, "keep her safe. Don't tell her who you are. Just keep her safe." "He knew I'd come here. He hoped you wouldn't, but he prepared in case you did." Laurie laughed, bitter, exhausted. "Even when he's gone, he's everywhere. That's what it means to be loved by a man like Matthew Smith." Rick finished his water. "It's suffocating, protective, absolute, but it's real." Across the room, Matthew spoke quietly with Carlos and 2 other men Laurie didn't recognize. They nodded at his words, their postures relaxed but attentive. Soldiers receiving orders from a general they'd follow into fire. "How many people still work for him?" Laurie asked. "Work for him?" "None. He retired." Rick paused. "But how many would pick up a phone if he called?" "Half this city." "That's the same thing." "No. One's obligation, the other's loyalty. There's a difference." Matthew finished his conversation and returned to the bar. He moved like a man carrying weight, not physical, but existential. The burden of choices made, lives affected, debts owed and collected. He stopped in front of Laurie. studying her with those two perceptive eyes. "We need to talk," he said. "Now?" "Now." Rick took the hint. "I'll finish closing up. Take your time." Matthew gestured toward the back office, a small room with a desk, filing cabinet, and a worn leather couch. Lori followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The door closed behind them. Silence pressed in. "Sit," Matthew said, but his tone was gentle, requesting, not commanding. Lori sat on the couch. Matthew pulled the desk chair around, sitting across from her, close, but not crowding, giving her space to breathe. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Lori broke. "You can't keep doing this." "Doing what?" "Saving me, protecting me, showing up every time my life goes sideways." Her voice cracked. "I left so you could be free, so you could stop being this. I know why you left. Then why didn't you stay away?" Matthew leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "Because the moment Rick sent me your photo, the moment I saw you in this bar wearing that bracelet, I realized something." "What?" "I can't protect you by staying away. I never could." His voice was raw, stripped of the cold authority he'd wielded earlier. "You think distance keeps you safe? It doesn't. It just means you face danger alone. I can handle myself. I saw how well you were handling yourself tonight." Anger flared. "That's not fair." "No, it's not." Matthew's expression softened. "But it's true. Lori, you're my daughter. You carry my name, my blood, my reputation, whether you want it or not. Running doesn't change that. It just means you run without backup. I don't want backup. I want a normal life. Then you were born into the wrong family." The words hung between them, brutal, honest, undeniable. Lori's eyes burned. "I hate that you're right. I hate it too. So what now? I just accept it? Accept that I'll always be Matthew Smith's daughter? That I'll never escape your shadow?" Matthew was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. 3 years ago, you asked me to let you go, to give you the chance to be normal. And I did. I stepped away. Retired. Built a life that didn't involve blood and fear, and the weight of an empire. But I was miserable." He met her eyes. "Not because I missed the power or the violence. Because I missed you. Every day. Every moment." The silence in my apartment was deafening. The freedom felt like drowning. Tears spilled down Lori's cheeks. "Dad, I'm not asking you to come back to my world. I'm asking you to let me be part of yours." His voice broke. "However that looks. Whatever you need. But please, don't ask me to stay away again. I can't. I won't." Lori stood, crossed the small space between them, and wrapped her arms around her father's neck. He pulled her close, one hand cradling the back of her head, and for the first time in 3 years, they both felt like they could breathe. "I missed you too," Lori whispered against his shoulder. Every single day, they held each other in the dim office, surrounded by the ghosts of violence and the promise of something fragile and new. Outside, Rick locked the front door. The Ember Lounge settled into silence. And in that moment, father and daughter reunited in the ruins of a night that had shattered and rebuilt them both. They began to understand what came next. Not running, not hiding, but learning to live in the space between two worlds, together. Outside, the city breathed cool night air. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, heading somewhere else, chasing other emergencies. The street was quiet, reflective of rain from earlier, neon signs casting colored light across wet pavement. Lori leaned against the brick wall of the Ember Lounge, her wrapped hands throbbing dully, her mind still processing everything that had happened in the span of 2 hours. Matthew stood beside her, cigarette between his fingers unlit. He'd quit smoking 3 years ago, but old habits died hard. Holding it was enough. A talisman, a reminder of who he used to be. "You really quit?" Lori asked, nodding at the cigarette. 2 years, 7 months, 14 days. He looked at it, smiled faintly. "But I keep one in my pocket, just in case." "In case of what?" "Nights like tonight." Lori laughed small, exhausted. "Are you going to light it?" Matthew studied the cigarette, then tucked it back into his jacket. "Not today." They stood in comfortable silence, watching a taxi pass, headlights cutting through darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The city continued its endless rhythm, indifferent to their small drama. "What happens now?" Lori finally asked. "What do you want to happen?" I don't know. She wrapped her arms around herself. I can't go back to pretending. Can't go back to Denver or wherever and act like tonight didn't happen. No, you can't. But I also can't. I can't be part of this. She gestured vaguely at the bar, the city, the world her father inhabited. The violence, the fear, the constant looking over my shoulder. I'm not asking you to be. Aren't you? The moment I stay, the moment I'm seen with you, I become a target. You know that. Matthew's jaw tightened. Then we make sure everyone knows what happens to people who target you. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Lori turned to face him. You solve problems with fear, with violence, with making examples of people. I can't live like that. What's the alternative? Let people like Max and Jimmy run free? Let Callisto take territory, hurt people, build his own empire on the bones of innocence? There are laws. Laws? Matthew's laugh was sharp. Lori, the law moves slow. By the time courts convict someone, how many lives are destroyed? How many families broken? And your way is better? My way is immediate, definitive, final. Your way is terrifying. Yes, it is. Matthew's voice softened. But it works. And in a world that preys on the weak, sometimes terror is the only language predators understand. Lori wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that there had to be another way, that civilization had evolved past vigilante justice. But she'd been on her knees tonight. She'd felt Max's grip, heard Jimmy's laughter, seen the way the entire bar had looked away. And it was her father's terror, his reputation, his violence, his absolute willingness to break bones that had saved her. The truth was uncomfortable, but it was truth. I tried to keep you out of this world, Matthew said quietly. I really did. I stepped away, built walls between us, convinced myself it was for your own good. It was. Was it? Because from where I'm standing, you ended up on the floor of a bar I used to own, being humiliated by thugs who would have done much worse if I hadn't walked through that door. Lori had no response to that. Matthew continued, his voice heavy with regret. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe keeping you in the dark, keeping you naive, wasn't protection. Maybe it was just selfish. Me wanting you to have the life I never did. You wanted me to be happy. I wanted you to be safe. He met her eyes. But you're my daughter. You've got my blood, my name, my instincts. Safety was never an option. A black car pulled up to the curb. Rick behind the wheel, engine idling. Safe house on 5th, Rick called through the open window. Got it ready. Clean sheets, stocked fridge, security system. Matthew nodded. Thanks, Rick. He turned to Lori. Come stay there tonight. Tomorrow, we'll figure out next steps. But tonight, you need rest. And you? I have loose ends to tie up. Callisto, among others. Fear spiked in Lori's chest. Dad, don't. I'm not going to kill him. Matthew's tone was almost amused. Just deliver a message. Make sure he understands the new reality. Which is? That I'm back. And this city remembers what that means. Lori studied her father, this man who'd built an empire, walked away, and returned in a single night because she needed him. This man who spoke of violence like negotiation and protection like religion. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted. Do what? Be your daughter. In this world. With these rules. Matthew stepped closer, placed his hands gently on her shoulders. Then we make new rules. Together. You tell me what you can live with, and I'll adjust. You'd do that? Lori, I walked away from everything for you once. I'd do it again. His voice cracked slightly. But this time, I'd rather we figure it out together. Find a middle ground. Build something that works for both of us. Tears welled again. What if we can't? Then we'll fail together, and that's still better than being apart. Lori leaned into him, forehead against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Strong, steady, the same rhythm that had comforted her as a child, through nightmares and scraped knees and the 1,000 small terrors of growing up. Okay, she whispered. Together, but I have conditions. Name them. No unnecessary violence, no revenge without reason, and you let me in. No more secrets, no more protection through ignorance. Matthew was quiet for a moment. Then, deal. They separated. Lori climbed into the car, settling into the back seat. Matthew leaned through the window. Get some sleep. I'll check in tomorrow. Be careful. Always am. Rick pulled away from the curb. Lori watched through the rear window as her father stood alone on the sidewalk, cigarette back in his hand, still unlit. A king surveying his kingdom. A father protecting his daughter. Both. Neither. Everything in between. 3 days later, the city whispered. In coffee shops and corner stores, in bars and boardrooms, the same name passed from lip to ear like currency. Matthew Smith is back. The Callisto crew scattered. Some fled the city entirely, packed bags in the night, and drove until state lines blurred. Others tried to negotiate, sending intermediaries with offers of peace, territory concessions, cash payments. Matthew refused them all. Not violently, not dramatically. He simply sent word through channels that had never truly closed. This city is under my protection again. Anyone who can't live with that should leave. Most left. Callisto himself vanished. Rumors swirled Mexico, Canada, dead in a ditch somewhere. Rick's contacts suggested Europe, possibly Prague, living under an assumed name. Matthew didn't pursue. The message had been delivered. The threat neutralized. Revenge, he'd promised Lori, only when necessary. This wasn't necessary. This was mercy. The Ember Lounge reopened on Thursday. New management, the sign read, though everyone knew what that really meant. Rick still ran day-to-day operations, but the ownership had shifted, transferred back to Matthew Smith through paperwork that would confuse any auditor. Lori stood behind the bar during the soft opening, pouring drinks for regulars who'd returned like pilgrims to a shrine. Some nodded at her with new respect. Others looked away, embarrassed by their earlier complicity. She'd made her choice. Not to run, not to hide, but to learn. If I'm going to be Matthew Smith's daughter, she'd told him 2 days ago, then I need to understand what that means. Really understand. So Matthew taught her. Not violence, he'd promised, and he kept his promises, but awareness. How to read rooms, how to identify threats, how to move through dangerous spaces without becoming prey. Predators hunt the vulnerable, he'd explained. So you make yourself invulnerable. Not through fear, but through presence, confidence, the knowledge that you're not alone. Because you're always watching. Because you're always capable. It was a strange education. Part self-defense, part psychology, part street wisdom accumulated over decades. Lori absorbed it like water, realizing how much of her father's instincts she'd inherited without knowing. The way she'd assessed Max and Jimmy that first night. The way she'd positioned herself near exits. The way she'd known, on some primal level, that the Ember Lounge was more than it appeared. She'd been running from her nature. Now she was learning to live with it. Friday evening, Matthew arrived at the bar during the dinner rush. He'd stayed away most of the week, giving Lori space, handling business, rebuilding networks that had frayed but never broken. Now he walked in wearing dark jeans and a simple black shirt, looking more relaxed than Lori had seen in years. She poured him whiskey without asking. He took it with a small smile. "How's it feel?" he asked. "Different. Strange." Lori wiped down the bar. "But not wrong." "Good." They worked in companionable silence, her serving drinks, him observing, two people learning to exist in the same space again. A young couple entered, nervous, clearly on a first date. Lori seated them at a quiet corner booth, brought menus, made recommendations, normal waitress things, the job she'd wanted when she first arrived. But she moved differently now, head higher, eyes sharper, aware of every entrance, every exit, every person in the room, not paranoid, prepared. When she returned to the bar, Rick was there, talking quietly with Matthew. "Everything sorted?" Rick asked. "Mostly. Few loose ends, but nothing urgent." Matthew took a sip of whiskey. "The territory's stable. Old debts are being honored. New players know the rules. And Callisto? Won't be a problem. Ever again." Something in his tone made Lori pause. "What did you do?" "Nothing violent. Just made sure he understood that returning would be unwise." "How unwise?" "The kind of unwise where his family stays safe as long as he stays gone." Matthew's expression was neutral. He made his choice. It should have disturbed her, this casual manipulation, this wielding of fear like a scalpel. But instead, Lori felt secure, protected by something larger than herself. Maybe that made her complicit. Maybe that made her her father's daughter in ways she'd denied. She was learning to live with that too. Later that night, after closing, the three of them sat at the bar, Matthew, Lori, and Rick, sharing a bottle of expensive scotch Rick had been saving. To new beginnings, Rick toasted. To family, Matthew added. To survival, Lori finished. They drank. Outside, the city hummed endless, indifferent, dangerous, and beautiful. Inside the Ember Lounge, 3 people who'd found their way back to each other sat in warm light, protected by reputation and loyalty, and love that looked nothing like fairy tales. Matthew reached into his pocket, pulled out an envelope. He slid it across the bar to Lori. What's this? Deed to the Ember Lounge. It's yours now. Lori stared. Dad, I can't. You can. And you will. His voice was firm but gentle. This place saved your life, brought us back together. It should be yours. Build something with it. Something that's part of both our worlds. What will you do? What I've always done. Protect, guide, stay in the shadows. He smiled. But this time, I'll visit, have dinner, be your father without being your whole world. Lori's eyes burned. She opened the envelope, legal documents, signatures, official seals, transfer of ownership, a piece of her father's empire handed over not as burden, but as gift. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for coming back. Rick cleared his throat. I'm getting emotional. Someone changed the subject. They laughed, real, unguarded, the sound of people who'd survived something terrible and come out changed but intact. Weeks passed, then months. The Ember Lounge thrived under Lori's management. She kept Rick on as general manager, brought in new staff, updated the menu, maintained the delicate balance between upscale bar and protected territory. Matthew visited twice a week, sometimes more. They had dinner in the back booth, talking about everything and nothing. He taught her the business, not the criminal side, but the legitimate operations, the investments, the networks of legitimate power. You don't have to be a criminal to have influence, he explained. You just have to understand how the world really works. Lori learned. And slowly, carefully, she built something new. A bar that was safe harbor. A business that employed people who needed second chances. A space where her father's reputation kept predators away. But her own character determined what grew in its place. One evening, a young woman came in nervous, broke, looking for work. Lori recognized herself in the stranger's eyes. You ever waitress before? Lori asked. Some. I'm good with people. I need a fresh start. Lori studied her, the careful guardedness, the hope tangled with fear, the sense of running from something. You running from something? Lori asked. The woman hesitated. Isn't everyone? Lori smiled, sad, knowing. You start tomorrow. Wear black and white. Don't be late. Thank you. Really. You don't know what this means. I think I do. As the woman left, Matthew appeared from the back office. He'd overheard. You're hiring strays now? Like father, like daughter. He laughed. Fair enough. They stood together, watching the bar fill with Friday night crowds, laughter and music, conversations and connections, the normal chaos of people living their lives. You did good, kid, Matthew said quietly. We did good. Yeah, we did. And in that moment, standing in a bar that had witnessed violence and reunion, fear and courage, the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, Lori Smith understood something fundamental. She would always be her father's daughter. The name would always carry weight. The shadow would always linger. But shadows only existed in the presence of light, and she'd spent long enough running from both. Now she stood in between daughter and owner, protected and protector, learning to wield her inheritance not as weapon or burden, but as tool for building something that mattered. The city still whispered, Matthew Smith is back. But they were starting to whisper something else too. His daughter's here, and she's not afraid. The legend reborn, the daughter awakened, the night that changed everything, and their story was just beginning. Thanks for sticking with this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's packed with unexpected turns and heartfelt moments. Click the image on your screen to keep the journey going, and make sure to hit subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I can't wait to see what you think.